Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be colouring up these adorable penguins from Rochelle and Miller. So this is a brand new set which has come out in September 2024 and it's called the Penguin Party Scene Creator. So you can mix and match all of these little penguins and their little igloo and create your own scenes. So you can print them all off together like this, or when you download the digital stamp, you get each of the individual images separately as well. So you can use as few or as many as you like, and you can build your own scenes, which I really love the versatility of that. So today I'm going to be colouring in my penguins with these brand new to me OLO markers. So I've recently made the investment in the 128 set of OLO markers. The reason I did this was because I was starting to have a few issues with my Copics. So I know a lot of you are the same. I have had issues with the Copic markers drying out. Even if they were brand new markers, they were starting to just dry up for no apparent reason. And when I bought refills for them, even refilling them didn't work. The nib was just completely dry. The marker was done. And it was just seemed to be happening more and more often, especially with the newer markers that I bought. So having looked into this a little bit, I realised that a lot of you are experiencing the same thing. Apparently, Copic markers can get these tiny cracks in the lids of their pens, which obviously mean that they're not sealing properly. Even when the lid goes on and it clicks and it feels like you've sealed the pen up, they're drying out and they are kind of beyond repair once this happens. So at £6 or so a marker, I was starting to get a little bit frustrated and I was looking at alternatives. So the most popular alternatives on the market seem to be the OLO markers or the Ohuhus. So I was very tempted to go for the Ohuhus because obviously the price point is a lot better. You can get a huge range of markers. I think they've got something like 300, maybe even 320 colours, something along those lines, for a couple of £100. So that was quite tempting. But recently, Seize the Stamp had a huge sale and it was 45% off everything in their store, and that included the OLO markers. So with that kind of discount, I couldn't resist and I ordered all 128. So yes, this is the first time I am giving them a test run. So I'll just give you my initial thoughts, because obviously this is the first thing that I've properly coloured up with them. I've completed my swatch chart. So I've had a little look at the range of colours available, but this is the first time I've actually coloured anything in with them. And what I have noticed is these markers are very juicy. That's my first initial observation. So I was finding I was getting a lot more wicking from these markers than I was from my Copics. So that's something which I'll have to get used to. I think I will try not to colour right up to the lines of my images just to allow for that little bit of bleeding outwards. And I will also probably give my colouring a bit of time between layers as well. Usually I will put down one layer of colour and go straight in with the next layer. I was finding that this was problematic when I was colouring in my penguins, and I was finding that I was getting a lot of kind of bleeding outside the lines. So thankfully, the colourless blender that you get with the OLOs is very good and it does mop up a lot of that excess colour that goes outside the lines, but it's not ideal and it doesn't work completely every time. So it's best to avoid it happening in the first place. So that's just one little adjustment I'm going to have to make in my colouring technique, I think, when I'm using these OLOs. The other thing that you might notice here is that the marker looks very, very short. The OLO markers are about half the size of a Copic marker, but you'd get these little connectors that you can screw into the end of the OLO marker, and then you put another OLO marker on the other end. So you've basically made a full-length marker with the brush tip at each end, but it's two different colours. So you can pair up whichever colours make sense to you to have together. So I haven't paired mine up yet because I wanted to wait until I'd done a bit more colouring and I kind of worked out which ones I want to go together. In all honesty, probably what I will do is just have them in the colour families going from lightest to darkest. A bit like you have with the kind of Spectrum Noir tri-blend markers. But I haven't got round to doing that yet, but that's something that I will be doing soon. The other thing that I would kind of mention is the nib of the OLO markers. It is very similar to the Copic one. I feel like it's perhaps a bit more brush-like, so it's maybe slightly softer than the Copic markers, but there's not much in it. But of course, the biggest difference between the OLOs and the Copics is the colour range. So I can't remember how many Copic have. Is it about 300 colours or something? At the moment, I have only got 128 colours of the OLO markers. And of course, that sounds like that's a lot of colours. But you need to have enough colours that you've got blending families. So when I'm colouring in my images here, I obviously am going to want a darker colour, a mid-tone and a lighter tone so I can get that shading on my images. There are a few colour families in the 128 OLO markers so far, but there just aren't as many options available as there are with the Copic markers. So I think I probably will be investing in, there's 32 new markers that that OLO have brought out in, I think is it May 2024, so not too long ago. They have just expanded their colour range. So I think I will be investing in those because I do really like how these OLO markers feel. I like how they colour, and I am happy to invest in expanding that range. But at the moment, I would say they're probably going to complement my Copic markers because I'm still going to need some of the colours that are available to me in the Copic colour line that I haven't got in the OLO line yet. Although that actually reminds me, if anybody knows where I can get OLO markers in the UK for a decent price, please let me know. They don't seem to be readily available over here yet. And getting them from America can be quite problematic as well, getting them over here to the UK. So if anybody knows a decent supplier for the OLO markers in the UK or Europe, please do let me know. So what else is there to report on the OLO markers? Let's see, the caps are quite hard to get on and off. But I'm actually taking that as a good thing because obviously that's what's caused some of the problems with the Copic markers. So with the OLOs, I am finding that you have to pull quite hard to get the cap off and then push it quite hard to get it to click back on again. I don't know whether that will get better the more I use them, but that is just one small observation. They are round, unlike the Copic markers. Those Copics are kind of oval shaped. These are round, but they have a little bit protruding from the cap, which stops them from rolling away from you, which is quite handy. And in terms of how they perform, I think that they are very similar to Copics, but as I said earlier, they are quite juicy, so they go down very easily. It's very, very easy to colour with them. It's very easy to blend with them. And obviously, because these are new to me, I've not had to refill any of them yet, but there are refills available for the OLO markers as well. I don't think I would have bought a marker that was not capable of being refilled. So as and when it comes the time to refill them, I will report back on that as well. But the big difference between the OLO markers and the Copics in terms of their structure is that the Copics have a kind of foam, I think it's foam core, which absorbs all of the ink. And then it's obviously let out gradually as you're colouring your image. The OLO markers just have a barrel that is full of ink. They don't have that kind of absorbent core. And what that means is that all of that ink is available for you to use. So whereas the Copic markers, they're going to absorb some of that ink into the core, and that will be wasted essentially. You will never have that ink available to you to use. So the OLOs are actually more efficient in that way. So even though they are smaller, My understanding is that they hold more ink than a Copic marker. So the Copic marker looks twice as big, but the OLO marker will hold more ink than a Copic marker. So I'll let you know how long they last, how often I'm having to refill them, how easy it is to refill them, and whether I'm having any issues as time goes on. So I'll just let you enjoy the rest of the colouring process. I'll list all of the colours that I've used in the description box below. And if you've got any comments about the OLOs or the colouring, just drop me a comment and I'll reply to all of you. Okay, so off screen I've just cut out all of those little images now that they're coloured up. I used my brother Scan and Cut to do this. And we're just going to move on to making the background for this card now. So I've got this really sweet set by Hero Arts. It's the Northern Lights Polar Bears. And I'm going to use this large Northern Lights stamp on the top of a panel of blue card and to create a kind of like Northern Lights sky as the background for my penguins. So I'm starting off by giving it a really good dust with some anti-static powder, and then I'm going to ink up my Northern Lights stamp with some embossing ink. Now the reason why I use anti-static powder on my card before I stamp my image is just to stop any embossing powder going where it shouldn't or sticking to anything that you don't want it to. So even though my WOW embossing powders have been treated with anti-static properties, the oils and greases from your hands, they stick to the surface of your card, and then the embossing powders will stick to those as well. So I always find it's better to be safe than sorry. Give it a good old dust, and then you get a cleaner, crisper image at the end. So I'm just bringing in my heat tool to heat set that, and it's given that really lovely green glow that I was hoping for. But I've noticed there are a couple of places in the image where it's a little bit patchy, and so I've decided to ink up my stamp again with embossing ink, and this time I'm going to go over it with a second colour of embossing powder. So the first colour that I used was called Newport, and the second one is called Hint of Green, and it looks white in the jar, but when it is applied to a darker colour cardstock, it really shows up in a kind of beautiful pearlescent green colour, which I thought would really help to add to that glowing effect that you get from the Northern Lights. And just to enhance that glowing effect even further, I've brought in my Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink pad. So I'm just inking up a blender brush, getting rid of the excess onto some scrap paper, and then I'm just blending all around that Northern Lights stamp to give the impression that it's really glowing. So next up I've just grabbed some landscape kind of background dies from My Favourite Things, and I'm going to use these to cut out some white cardstock to make some snowy hills, which is going to be the background for our penguin scene. I'm just placing these against the background to see how tall I need to cut my white cardstock. So then I'm going to attach my die to my white cardstock with a little bit of low tack tape, and I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine. So where the die has cut the cardstock, I'm left with two pieces of card which have each got a slope across the top. I'm going to use these to create the two hills on my background. So now that I've got those cut out, I'm just going to lay out my pieces over the card and decide where I want everything to go before I stick it down. Having trimmed the excess off the bottom of the snowy hills, I am now just adding a little bit of depth and shading to my night sky with some Black Soot Distress Oxide, which is going to go on the very, very edges of the panel. And then I'm just going to blend that in towards the centre of the panel with some chipped sapphire. So to add on my snowy hills to the background, I'm using tape runner for the first hill, so that's going to be flush with the background. And then the second hill I'm going to add with a little bit of foam tape, so I'm just trimming that down onto the reverse of my panel and popping that onto the card, and that's going to give us just a little bit of kind of visual interest and some dimension to the card. So next up, I'll just be adding in my penguins and the igloo, and as you can see on this one, I've added a bit of foam tape onto the top half and I'm using liquid glue on the bottom half because the top half of the igloo is going to be sticking to the base of the card and the bottom half of the igloo will be sticking to the snowy hill that's been popped up with foam tape. So I'm just making sure to level out that dimension. And then I'm going to simply add in my penguins with some foam squares. I like these ones from Scrapbook Adhesives because in the packet they come in the larger size and the smaller size, so they are really good for whatever size of die cuts you are adhering to your project. So the last thing to do is to add a sentiment, and you can tell that I'm a fan of this stamp set because I actually have the original physical stamp set from when Rochelle brought this out with My Favourite Things or MFT stamps. So I haven't had a chance to use the original stamp set yet. So I'm going to bust that open now and use one of the sentiments from the stamp set because obviously they are designed to work really well. So I've just chosen this one that says "Have an Ice Birthday" and I'm going to heat emboss that onto my panel. So the first thing I'm going to do is use my anti-static powder tool on this like crazy. I'm going to dust that up really well because we have used Distress Oxides on this recently and they are probably still going to be a little bit wet and the embossing powder is going to want to stick to that, so we need to dust that off as well as we possibly can. So I have now inked up my stamp and I've stamped that onto the background, and I'm just going to add some bright white powder from Wow Embossing onto this sentiment. This is my favourite white embossing powder for sentiments because it's super fine, so it's really good for getting those detailed small letters. And despite our best efforts with the anti-static powder, we have just got a few little stray particles of embossing powder dotted around, and it's hardly surprising because we have literally just inked up this panel. But if that happens, all you need to do is just take a dry paintbrush, and I like to use one with a kind of chiseled edge because it helps you be a bit more precise, and you can just brush away that powder from the panel. The last thing I'm going to do is just dust away any of that excess anti-static powder, and then that completes our card for today. I hope you've enjoyed watching the card come together, and I hope the information about the OLO markers was helpful to you as well. If you've got any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you, so just drop them in the comment section below. Don't forget to give me a like if this video was helpful to you, and subscribe to my channel for some more inspiration coming soon. Bye for now.